Hi, my name is Tyler Link and I own 3 separate companies and have over 25 employees, and over the course of time, I've learned that not everyone does what you want them to do, so here are reasons why they're not doing it and how to fix it. So there's 3 big reasons why someone isn't doing what you want them to do, and the number 1 is they just don't know what they have to do. And I know this sounds kind of simple, and a lot of times you're like, oh, well, Tyler, I've already been talking to my employees, I tell them what to do, they know what to do, but you have to get them to teach you what you think that they should be doing. So for instance, now when I tell people what to do, I don't just say, hey, I need you to go do this, do you understand? And of course they're gonna say yes. And then what I do is then I flip that and I say, okay, great, teach me what you're supposed to do. And what I'm gonna be listening for is everything that I think that I told them to do. Because for instance, I'm having a product manager issue lately and I keep telling him to be proactive. And for the longest time, I wasn't following the framework, which I'm about to teach you guys. And I'd say, hey, I need you to be proactive. Do you understand? And he said, yeah, I know I need to be proactive. But he still wasn't looking at the jobs that he had coming up on the schedule 2 days in advance. So then I would say, okay, you need to be proactive. So what does that mean to you? And he's like, oh man, I'm not sure. It means I need to think about things in advance. I'm like, okay, well, how far in advance? And he's like, oh, I'm not sure. And then that's when I realized I caught it. I thought he knew what I was telling him to do was be proactive, but what I really realized is he didn't know how to be proactive. So that basically was number 2, is they don't know how to do it. So even if they know what you're asking them to do, they don't really know how you want it best. And so what I'm always asking my employees is to say, hey, what are you trying to do? And how are you going to do it? And if they recite it back verbatim on how I want them to do it, then I got a pretty good understanding that they know what I want to do and how to do it. And the third big reason why is they don't know when they need it done by. So before in the past, when I was first starting my company, I would give people tasks all the time and I would say, hey, will you do this for me? And then they'd say yes. And then I would check back in later and I'd say, hey, where is that? And they'd say, oh, it's not done. I'd say, well, why not? And they'd say, oh, I didn't know that you needed it done by now. And so now when I'm assigning tasks, I'm not only saying what and how I want it done, but also by when. Every single time that I assign a task, it has to have a deadline with it, so it's very, very clear on when I want it done by. And those are the 3 biggest reasons. If you just do that, that is the 80% of what you need to do to get people to do what you want them to do. If they know what you want, how you want them to do it, when you want it done by, most of the time that's gonna solve a lot of your issues. But there's a lot of other reasons why people still don't do things, even if they know all of that. And so one of the big things is they're not motivated financially. Like for instance, when I was asking a salesman to do project management duties, I realized that he wasn't doing them. And then over time, I would get so annoyed. I'm like, hey man, do you not understand what you want to do or what I want you to do? Do you not understand how I want you to do it or when to do it by? And he would basically be getting really annoyed that I was asking him that. And to be honest, I was almost tempted to fire him. But then I kind of thought about it and I realized that he gets paid commission, and that's to sell a job. It has nothing to do with the job being completed. And so if you want people to do what you want them to do, you have to make sure that their pay is aligned with it. So if you think about it from my salesman's perspective, every single time that he was doing project management duties, he was losing money. Why? Because he wasn't spending time making sales. And so that is why he was getting so annoyed and why he wasn't doing stuff. So over time, I actually ended up getting a project manager, but if I wanted my salesman to be doing project management stuff, in his pay, you could say, hey, you're gonna get a commission off every single sale, and then you're gonna get also another piece of commission based on how the job goes. Now all of a sudden I'm tying part of his pay to what I want him to do, which is to make sure the job goes well. And so if you're having issues, even though people know what you want them to do, double check their pay and make sure that it all lines up. Number 2 is maybe you don't have a culture fit and people don't know why that you're doing the things that they're doing. Like for instance, a lot of business owners, we fall trapped to this. We just tell people what to do, but we give them no deeper motivation for why. And unfortunately, humans are humans and we're emotional beings. We're not like robots, and maybe AI will replace all of us one day. But until then, we have to appeal to the emotional side of people. We can't just say, hey, I need you to answer the phone. We can say that, but it's a lot more powerful if we say, hey, I need you to answer the phone because we are a premium provider of concrete service. And if we're not answering the phone, it's gonna be really hard for people to believe that we're premium. So you are setting the very first initial contact with someone, and if we're answering the phone on the first or second ring, we are gonna look much more premium, and you are basically helping us give that value proposition to our customer. Does that make sense? See, so there's 2 things the goal is the same, which is to answer the phone, but with the second version, you're saying why that's so important. And if you do that, then people are a lot more likely to respond and actually do what you want them to do. And then third is they don't have the right tools. So for instance, if you're trying to get someone to do something, like for instance, it could even be answering the phone, but then they don't answer the phone because maybe they're always busy doing something else, then you have to give them the right tools and the right scenario to make sure that they can do it. So as the business owner, I'm just giving you things to think about. If you realize that someone's not doing something and they know what to do, how to do it, when to do it by, and they know the why and they have the right tools, right? We're just kind of thinking about all of these biggest things and we're trying to make their life simple to do their job because that's what creates efficiency. And then I don't want this video to be super long, but there's a lot of other things that can affect someone's performance, like personal issues or basically being burned out. Maybe they're working too much, or there's so many other things that could affect someone's performance. But at the end of the day, that's not so much of what you can control as the owner. So now we're about to talk about those are the reasons why someone's not doing what you want them to do. So now how can we actually have the talk track and what's the framework that I've been using that's been very successful when I'm having issues with an employee? So the very first thing that I do, like I said, is I go over the big three. I say, hey, tell me what you think I'm asking you to do. They're gonna tell me what. Then I'm gonna say, okay, well then how does that really work? Like, what does that really mean? Then they're gonna say how, and then I'm gonna ask them to repeat back to me what the timeline is. So granted, all three of those, we go check, check, check. All of those make sense. Now we're gonna move on. So here's my 5-step framework for what I'm gonna do after the fact if I've already went through the big three and that wasn't the problem. So number one is I'm just gonna make sure that the issue is identified. I'm just gonna state it very clearly, say, hey, here's what the issue, for instance, let's just do my product manager. Let's do a little sample. The issue is you're not being proactive. You're not looking at jobs before we actually start them, which means you can't order materials ahead of time, can't coordinate equipment, etc. Then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give a goal. I'm gonna say, hey, this is the problem. Now, what I want you to do is guaranteed every single time before we start a project, not just being proactive, but I want you to look at the job notes 2 days ahead of time. And the day after that you look at it, I want everything to be coordinated before we're actually gonna start the job, because that's the whole point of being proactive, is preparing so that way when the crew gets to it, we could be efficient. So now I've already identified the problem, I've went over the goal, now I'm gonna give them the action steps. So step one, this is what you need to do. You need to look at the job notes. Step number two is you're gonna prepare the next day. This is how you prepare. Step three, when you line up the crew, you're already gonna have everything basically pre-organized. So now we can be very efficient. Does that make sense? Step four is I'm gonna give timelines. I'm gonna say, hey, this is when your new actions have to start. So for instance, today's a Thursday. I could say, you could give the next 2 days to prepare, but by next week, I want this to be your standard of operation. Basically, this is what I want you to do moving forward, starting Monday. Does that make sense? Yes or no? Yes. Okay, cool. And then lastly, step five is I have to give consequences for if they don't do it. So if I went through everything, I've given very clear expectations. I say, hey, this is how I want it done, and this is the timeline that you have to do it. And then lastly is you have to give consequences. If it's a serious enough problem, which for my project manager it was, I'm basically saying, hey, I need my project manager to do this. This is a part of your job duties. And if you cannot do this, then I'm going to have to find someone who can, which is not a very comfortable conversation, but it's good just to let people know how serious of a problem something is. Maybe you're having a problem with someone and it's not as serious as firing them, but if it is that serious, then you have to be honest, and even though it's very awkward to say that, at the end of the day, they have to know what is gonna happen if they don't do it. And that way, if you ever are going to fire them, an employee doesn't wanna be fired just for nothing. Like, they don't want to wake up one day, think that they have no problems and then get fired. But if you're being very open and honest with what you're expecting them to do, how you want them to do it, when you want them to do it by, and they're still not doing it, then they're probably gonna know that they're gonna get fired. And at that point, it's not on you because you did everything you could to help them. You're giving them the right tools. You're telling them how you want them to do it. You're making expectations clear. You're being there for help if they need help to answer any questions. And if they're still not doing it at that point, it might just be time to find someone else and finally make that firing call. So that's it for today's video. If you liked the video, make sure you give it a like and subscribe to the channel for content just like this, and I'll see you in the next one.